So I really wanted to watch this movie and review it right when it came out, but my dumbass had already started a whole Conjuring Cinematic Universe review series, and I wanted to do them all in order, but the problem was I just couldn't ever bring myself to watch The Curse of La Llorona and the third Annabelle movie. I just couldn't like sit down and watch them. I tried. Apologies if you thought you were getting reviews of those movies. You're probably not. But anyway, here's Conjuring 3. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Jake, the Scary Story Guy, and today we are talking about the third Conjuring movie, The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It. And this movie came out back in 2021, and like I said, I put off watching it even though I was really hyped for it. However, as the reviews started to trickle in, I kind of realized this movie does not have nearly the acclaim that the first two Conjuring movies got. The IMDb scores for the first two Conjuring movies were 7.5 and 7.3, which are like fantastic review scores for horror movies. But this one got a 6.3. Rotten Tomatoes, 86%, 80%, 56%. So there's this pretty universal recognition that like the satanic magic of the first two Conjuring movies is not captured here. And I've got to say, I completely agree with that. I had tricked myself into thinking that the engine that made this whole series go was Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga, who star as Ed and Lorraine Warren. Their performances are just outstanding, and I figured I will watch anything these guys are doing these characters in, and I'll love it because they're the heart and soul of this whole thing. But I think this movie proves that acting alone can't carry an entire project. James Wan did not direct this movie. He did a fantastic job with the first two films, and I think he was slated to do this, but then he was spending too much time directing Aquaman, which, if that's not just a huge kick in the nuts. They got a guy named Michael Chavez to direct this, who previously his most well-known directing credit was The Curse of La Llorona, which totally bombed. So I guess that kind of tells you how much energy and focus was put into this project, and the difference in quality is just really apparent. So I've got to be honest, the beginning of this movie is actually really good. The first 10 minutes of this movie, it's like this exorcism sequence. I was really impressed, but that ended up being the best part of the whole movie, which I'm gonna spoil, by the way. Spoiler alert here. I just thought that this whole film was so toothless compared to the first two Conjuring movies. It just couldn't decide like what it wanted to be. And it bears repeating that I love the first two Conjuring movies. I actually view them almost as masterpieces of modern horror. But this movie just tries and fails to capture that magic in some really inexplicable ways. And I don't want to overreact here, but it actually brought my opinion of the first two Conjuring movies down slightly, because those movies, I think they're fantastic, but they are formulaic. And so when you see the formula applied to this movie, a project that doesn't work, it sort of bestows a silliness on the whole thing. You even feel that formula in the very first shots of the movie. The opening text that they put on the screen is like, Ed and Lorraine Warren saw some f***ed up shit, but no case was worse than this. And you're like, oh yeah, the first two movies basically said the same thing, huh? And so you kind of feel like going forward in this franchise, they've like already blown their load with Ed and Lorraine's biggest cases. And so like they're just gonna have to resort to increasingly silly stuff as the year, like Ed and Lorraine Warren saw so many haunted houses, but they only saw one haunted mailbox. Ed and Lorraine Warren have never seen a produce aisle with so many demons until now. God, that's so bad. I wish I had the voice of the honest trailer guy. But anyway, unlike the first two Conjuring movies, which actually did live up to the formulaic superlative thrust upon them, this movie's just really dry. So the basic premise is, back in the 80s, this dude killed his landlord, and he tried to plead not guilty, and his defense was that he was possessed. And it's sometimes called the Devil Made Me Do It case, hence the title of this movie. I guess a few months before, he had been like invested in the exorcism of a family member, which who would have guessed that family turned out to be unbalanced. And so after he kills this dude, he starts claiming in court that like, oh, the demon that was ejected from this guy's body during the exorcism, Exhibit A, was like transferred into my body, and it made me kill this guy. And that exorcism is the first scene of this movie. And then the murder happens fairly early on in the movie too, so then you get the feeling like, oh, this is gonna dive into like a courtroom style drama, like Exorcism of Emily Rose style. And I mean, the poster basically claims as much. It's like the demonic case that shocked America. But that's just the overstatement of the century, because as far as I can tell, this guy goes into court, claims that he's possessed, and the judge is like, no. Okay, and then, you know, 5 minutes later, he's like, oh, okay, it was self-defense, Your Honor, and that's it. At one point in the movie, Ed Warren's like, this court acknowledges the existence of God every time a witness takes the stand. It's about time they acknowledge the existence of the devil, too. But they don't, of course, and so this movie has no interesting courtroom aspect to lean into, which means that it just devolves into this barely hatched mystery about who keeps putting these witchy totems everywhere. Now, I'll admit, the villain of this movie, she's pretty creepy. She doesn't even have a name. She's just called the Occultist, which is kick-ass, and she's just running this whole little Satan operation down in her basement. Her dad was like a priest when she was growing up, and he was constantly just being like, hey, little girl, come check this shit out. These are devils. This is evil. I bet you never want to mess around with this, right? And of course, that has the exact opposite effect. The dad is played by Denethor, by the way, from Lord of the Rings, so I guess we're just always doomed to associate this actor with questionable parenting. But anyway, whenever the Occultist is on screen, like, I'm interested. But it's not enough, because ultimately this is a movie that tries to replicate the formula of the first two Conjuring movies without any of like the creative soul. And it kind of lays bare the fact that those movies are formulaic. They are cliched, and what really makes them pop is the subtlety of the craft behind them. It's still somewhat enjoyable, mostly thanks to Patrick and Vera and that opening exorcism scene. There's a creepy scene in a morgue, but yeah, this is just an enormous step down from the first two films. I'm gonna give The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It 2.5 stars out of 5. Which brings me to, I guess, some vague wonderings about the future of this series and the future of this extended universe generally. These films have obviously been wildly successful, and in spite of the lackluster reception this one got, it's obviously in Warner Brothers' interest to try to get another Conjuring film off the ground. Both Patrick and Vera have expressed their interest in continuing to play Ed and Lorraine Warren, so I can only assume we're gonna get another one of these. I just hope that when it happens, they get James Wan to direct again. I mean, that dude is so crisp and precise in his direction, and the difference in quality from the first two films in this new one is so stark. But beyond that, I want to see Ed and Lorraine Warren get past this formula, this like exploration of their real life cases. I mean, at the end of the day, these movies are fiction. Of course, the supposed real life exploits of Ed and Lorraine Warren are also complete fiction, but that's neither here nor there. But couldn't we just insert them into like a wholly fictional story at this point? I mean, there are a lot of reasons these movies work and people go to see them, but the whole based on a true story thing, I don't know that that's really one of them. So I guess, especially now that the real Ed and Lorraine are both dead, like, what's the harm in just kind of taking some liberties with them and just using them as characters? I just feel like deviating from Ed and Lorraine's actual casework would grant everyone this kind of artistic freedom to pursue a project they actually liked, instead of having to, you know, attach themselves to a random 80s murder trial where a guy made an argument that got laughed out of the courtroom 5 minutes in. Anyway, those are my thoughts on that. So stay tuned, guys, for more scary story content coming soon. In the meantime, thank you for watching my video, and here's hoping you survive to see the next one.